The theme song may well say, we're going to win in the end. And it might even be true. But it's going to be a mess getting there. And I mean that in a good way. Hey there, folks. So, one of my favorite shows is leaving Netflix pretty soon. She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. If I get this out when I am intending to, then you'll have a few weeks after this video goes live to go and see it or re-watch it. That having been said, just because it's leaving Netflix, it may not be going away for good. This may not be an infinity train falling off of HBO Max situation, because while it is a Netflix original in that Netflix was the first place that broadcast it, it's owned by DreamWorks. Now that the initial broadcast agreement has expired, DreamWorks can, in theory, shop it around somewhere else. Will someone else buy it in order to run it on their streaming service? I don't know. I mean, maybe, but it's hard to know what the pull is on these things. And the big push with streaming services seems to be new stuff over old stuff, even though old stuff does tend to fill out their back catalogs. Anyways, that's a whole other conversation. But before it is gone from Netflix to an uncertain future, and infuriatingly uncertain because they only put the first 3 seasons out in physical media, I still want seasons 4 and 5, and Netflix put out Nimona on DVD. God. It was Oscar nominated, for crying out. I'm okay. So, before it is off of the streaming service that has been its home since the beginning, I want to talk about it again. Now, I've talked about She-Ra and the Princesses of Power before, back when it was still airing, a few times. I've also done a number of fan videos over on my secondary channel, Break Room of Geeks. I have only just recently started doing animated music videos again over there. Don't expect that as a regular feature, but most of the ones over there are of She-Ra, and there's a reason for that. I adore this show. I love the characters. I love the structure of the story overall. I love the progression, and I love the villains. And it's that last one that I want to focus on, because there's a really interesting specific thing with the villains on She-Ra. They're all a mess. Now, messy villains aren't unique. This isn't a new thing. It's actually pretty common, but it's a little less common to have this much of your hierarchy of villains be a mess. Now, before I get into this, I want to stress, I'm not saying messy villains are innately better, and I'm not saying that I can't enjoy a very pulled together and calculated villain. But there's something about the messiness that I really do enjoy. I mean, very calculated and pulled together villains. For me, the top tier of that is David Xanatos from Gargoyles. He's so good at it, he has a trope named after him, for crying out loud. But those sort of on top of everything, planned so thoroughly that they will always benefit, or planned so thoroughly that it's very obvious the writer has not taken actual feasibility into account, has just decided the villain knows exactly what they need to know in order to win, and that's where you get into just doing it clumsily. But we're not dealing with any of that. It can work, but that's not what we're talking about. I'm going to be primarily talking about 3 villains here. We're going to talk about Catra, we're going to talk about Shadow Weaver, and we're going to talk about Hordak. Now, before some of you get in the comments and start typing out, oh, but what about... Wait, I will get there. We're going to start with these 3. Now, I'm going to try and present this in a way that is accessible to people who haven't already seen the show, but admittedly, I am talking from the perspective of someone who has watched through the entire thing more than once. So let's start with Catra, who kind of fits the classic template of a messy villain because she's a personal antagonist. When you were talking about villains with grander plans, they usually need to be a little bit more pulled together. But when you talk about personal antagonists, someone who's dangerous because of a grudge they have against one of your hero characters, they are allowed to be very messy. And Catra very much is. Now, Catra's messy for a very obvious reason. Her connection with Adora. Now, Adora, also known as She-Ra when she transforms, is the main character of the show. It's actually a lot more of an ensemble piece than you might suspect. That's actually why the title is She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. The original title for the 80s show was just She-Ra, Princess of Power because it was really just about her. This is much more about the ensemble cast, but she is ultimately the key player on the heroic side, and Catra is the key player on the villain side. They grew up together. They mean a lot to each other. By the end, it is made wonderfully clear and undeniable that they do, in fact, love each other. So when Adora leaves the Horde that they had grown up in, and Catra doesn't, that split is huge. And you might find yourself thinking, well, okay, but if Catra's in love with her, like, why did she stay with the Horde? Is she, like, loyal to them? Oh, no. She's not loyal to the Horde particularly. But what she is possessive and spiteful. The thing that makes her not go with Adora is because she can't understand why Adora would ever consider leaving in the first place. Adora finds out that the Horde is not what she has been gaslit into believing, but instead is this horrific, dangerous, violent organization that is trying to take over the planet. And once she finds that out, she leaves. Catra never bought into the propaganda.
They've been lying to us, manipulating us, Hordak, Shadow Weaver, all of them. Duh! Did you just figure that out?
She stayed because Adora was there. And upon hearing that Adora would abandon the place where Catra was, and seeing Adora join the rebellion, people who she had known for a matter of hours at best, and would leave Catra behind, Catra took that personally. And she took it bitterly. And while, especially once you've seen the whole show and you come back on a rewatch, there is definitely an underlying level of affection that Catra has towards Adora. There is so much anger at the idea that she would have been left behind. And that messiness actually is part of what makes her even more dangerous than she might have been otherwise. Because Catra is not good at controlling her emotions, at keeping it together, at staying on task. But that vicious streak that she has, that gets her pretty far, both within the hierarchy of the Horde, but also just as an antagonist to Adora, because she can and will hurt anybody to try and get to Adora. How far is she prepared to take it? Well, spoilers for the third season of She-Ra. By that point in the show, she is so fed up with Adora failing to come back to her that she does something that she has been informed runs the risk of destroying the entire world. And she does it seemingly for no other reason than Adora told her not to. She would literally destroy the world just to hurt this one person. Their relationship is a disaster for so much of the show in the best possible way. Catra cannot keep her cool. She cannot build meaningful relationships. And on the rare occasions where she exhibits any trust towards anyone else, something goes horribly wrong. They betray her outright, or they otherwise set her off in a way that causes her to sabotage the relationship. And as she has fewer and fewer people to rely on, it doesn't make her less dangerous, it makes her more, because she has less foundation to stand up on. Everything crumbles around her, but she still won't admit that she's wrong.
Some people have a bad day. I've had a bad life.
It's Adora's fault in her mind. And there is reason for that. That has to do with the next villain we're going to talk about, Shadow Weaver. Because Shadow Weaver raised the two of them. And she doted on Adora and was mean to Catra. She is a terrible person and absolutely horrific to have as a parental figure. But importantly, she had expectations of Adora. She had none of Catra.
Adora, you must do a better job of keeping her under control.
So they were raised in an environment where Adora was expected to handle both of them, which means that if Catra did something wrong, it's Adora's fault. Because it's Catra's nature to just screw up. Nobody expects anything else of her. She will just screw things up, cause harm, attack people. That's just who she is. But Adora, you know better. We expected better of you. Catra and Adora internalized this too. Catra internalized this to the point that she continues to blame Adora for her own actions.
All of this happened because of you.
And Adora internalized this as she continues to try and give Catra chance after chance to come over to the other side. And this really does culminate in the 3rd season of the show, because after everything went down, when Catra threw that switch to open the portal and almost destroyed the entire world, afterwards, there is a look exchanged between the two of them that Adora gives Catra, and from Catra's response, you realize that in that moment, it's over. Adora is done making excuses for her and is done holding back. And that is a very earned moment, because within the framework of what happened as the portal was pulling the world apart, Adora finally said,
I didn't make you do anything! You made your choice. Now live with it!
Now, of course, 2 more seasons, trust me, there's more spiraling for Catra to do, and there is ultimately an arc for the two of them in the 5th season that, going into that season, I didn't think they'd pull off, but they did. Now, I'm not going to get into that because we're not dealing with that kind of arc right now. We're dealing with messy villains. Catra is the obvious messy villain. Of course she's the messy villain. She's the personal antagonist. What about the others? Well, Shadow Weaver. On initial presentation, one might think of Shadow Weaver as the more pulled-together, higher-ranking villain over Catra. Catra's the wild card. She is far more pulled together. And on the surface, she does appear to be that. But the thing is, she's got blinders, just like Catra does. Catra's blinders are about Adora specifically. Shadow Weaver's blinders are about magic and power and her pursuit of that. Because once she is at risk of that being taken from her, she breaks down.
Of course, Lord Hordak.
When she is removed from a position of power, she cracks badly. She cannot hold it together. She is desperate, pleading even.
Come back to me!
And because she was always out for herself and never truly had loyalty to the Horde, she defects and turns herself in to the rebellion, where of course she continues to pursue power here by attempting to manipulate Glimmer, who is princess and then later queen of the nation of Brightmoon. But even as Shadow Weaver slips into that manipulative vizier sort of thing, nudging Glimmer along a path that will allow her to have access to a certain kind of magical power again, she still cracks at a few points. There is this wonderful moment where a simple suggestion is made that makes total sense to do, but it is not what Shadow Weaver wants. And boy, her facade of holding it together cracks.
We need you to reconnect to the Black Garnet.
Huh? What?
Just that little moment, that little what? She cannot believe that after all that she has done to try and put herself in a position to have access to the Black Garnet again, to get to feel its power surge through her, that somebody else is going to get it. Barely keeping it together, an absolute mess, quick to betray, not for some greater cause, but because she doesn't care if it's not about granting herself magical power. She's an addict more than anything else. I mean, she's also a gaslighter and abusive parent and absolutely awful person who I will continue to attest the show does not actually redeem. Some people claim that it does. No. I disagree. I don't mean they tried to redeem her and failed. I mean, I don't think that was what they were ever trying to do with her. But that is a little bit of another conversation. And it's a little bit more spoilery than I'm trying to be in this one. So, okay, we have the personal antagonist, clearly a mess. We have the one above her who actually helped craft her into the mess that she is, also kind of messy. Okay, that makes sense if, the person who has raised someone who turned out to be such a disaster is at least a little bit of a disaster themselves. Okay, but what about Hordak? At the top of the heap, the leader of the Horde, the one who is focused, the one who appears pulled together and on top of it. And that is initially how he is presented. He cuts through the nonsense. He tells Shadow Weaver to her face, "You are screwing this up. I'm going to put Catra in charge because she is effective where you have failed." It is cold, it is calculating, and it comes across as that sort of mastermind thing where he's just got everything together and he knows what he's doing and he is total focused and everything is under his control. It's not, though. As we learn more about him and what drives him and what motivates him, we realize he's got blinders too. Catra has blinders for Adora, Shadow Weaver has blinders for magical power, and he has blinders for Horde Prime. Hold on to Horde Prime, we will come back to him. But Hordak, despite appearing initially to be completely focused, militarized, on top of everything, no, he's not. Because whenever the possibility of reconnecting with his creator is on the table, the cracks form again. You can see how desperate he is to get off of Etheria and get out of this place where he feels completely trapped, and how much he is willing to sacrifice in order to do it. Is he a good tactician? Can he practically conquer the planet? Yeah, actually, given the time and resources that he has, he comes pretty close. But he's not doing it because he actually intends to do that. He's doing it because that's what he needs to do to get the resources to do what he actually cares about, which is open a portal and get back to Horde Prime. Remember that portal that almost destroyed the planet? Catra may have thrown the switch, but Hordak built it. And the fact that it almost destroyed the planet wasn't, strictly speaking, his fault, but it is the product of his obsession. And that obsession is where he is messy. And that really comes out of him when it comes to Entrapta. Now, Entrapta is a princess who gets left behind in the Fright Zone, initially believed dead by the other princesses in the rebellion. She is a scientist. She's focused on technology, especially First One's technology, which is the sort of ancient history and old forgotten powers and tools that litter the planet. She's very interested in that, which means she is very helpful to Hordak. And Hordak starts to have an emotional connection with her. One he doesn't really know what to do with, but it's there. And as a result, when he is later told by Catra that she betrayed him, he doesn't take it well. And then even later, when he finds out Catra lied to him, he takes that even worse. He may have those blinders on for getting back with Horde Prime, but he does have a heart. And it's one that when it gets hit, he will go vicious. And in a way that is quite possibly counter to his own interests. Because the smartest thing he could have done once he found out that Catra had done that to him and done that to Entrapta, he should have just ordered her killed, but he didn't. He went to do it himself because it's personal now. And also, to come back to Catra again, you want to know why she betrayed Entrapta? Because Entrapta said Adora was right and Catra couldn't handle it. This is an entire hierarchy. Hordak at the top, then Shadow Weaver, then Catra, although Shadow Weaver eventually comes out of that and Catra climbs the ranks. But it's this entire hierarchy, all the layers down. Everybody's a mess. That's not getting into the ground level people who are also a mess, though often for more comedic reasons. Like Scorpia's just a sweetheart who's on the wrong side of the fight. That is arguably true to a slightly lesser extent of Lonnie, Rogelio, and Kyle. So you have this entire villain structure where everybody's a mess. And that makes them more interesting. They're not just there to figure out what is the most efficient way for us to win. They have personal stakes. They have things that drive them to do something that is not what is in their best interest, or indeed in anyone's best interest in that moment sometimes. And that is why we're going to come back to that thing I brought up, and that thing that I know some people have been shouting, oh, but what about this? Okay, fine. Let's talk about Horde Prime. Isn't Horde Prime that perfectly pulled together villain you're saying none of these other characters are? Yes, he is. That is why he is the perfect villain of the final season. In season 5, Horde Prime arrives. And Horde Prime is just as pulled together as Hordak tried to be and failed at. He is cold, calm, calculating, driven, tactical, devious. He is everything that the villains up to this point have failed to be. But more to the point, those other 3 villains I mentioned have done extensive damage in direct one-on-one conflicts, but also on larger scales. The Horde has won numerous times in specific instances. It has taken over various kingdoms. It is winning. The rebellion isn't so much defeating them as it is slowing down the pace at which they have been winning. She-Ra can definitely turn the tide of any specific battle she shows up in, but the overall shape of the war, it's a stalemate at best. So dealing with these 3 levels of messy as hell villains who can barely hold themselves together, and they've already been winning. And what happens when the guy shows up who actually knows what he's doing, who has it together, who can stick to a plan, who can adapt that plan on the fly if he needs to? What happens? He wins almost immediately. He takes control of the skies in an instant, and he has control of the majority of the planet almost as fast. After 4 seasons of both sides, the Horde and the Rebellion, trying to build up their power to be able to fully deal with the other and kind of coming close to matching each other, arguably with the Horde in a slightly better position than the Rebellion, but like more or less matching each other, then in comes Horde Prime, and it's just the adult in the room. Children, sit down. I'm in charge. And the impact of that would not be nearly what it is if there wasn't already so much damage done by characters who were so messy. Don't get me wrong, I am not saying Horde Prime is the best villain of the show. He's not. I actually think the other 3 are better villains, but he is absolutely the correct and perfect villain for the final stretch of the show, because he is the one thing that none of the other villains have been. Not Catra, not Shadow Weaver, not Hordak. He is completely in control in a way none of them have been. So of course he's worse. Of course he wins almost instantly. Of course he is the final thing that has to be dealt with because he is in control of almost everything. The escalation of this show, of watching these villains come apart over time, and then of the almost overcompetent villain showing up at the end to go like, all right, you've had your fun. I'm in charge now. It is so well paced, builds so amazingly, and I adore this show. Every season is great, especially if you remember to consider that seasons 2 and 3 are really just one season that they broke into 2. You can look at the episode count for the proof of that. So keeping that in mind, I would say every season is better than the last. And the way that it develops things and it builds and it scales and it just results in this final confrontation that is exactly what it needs to be, of people coming together to face a villain who will never be his own worst enemy. He can't be. He's too pulled together. That's the final challenge. But it works and doesn't feel like a cliche mastermind style villain, the kind of villain that I often don't like. It doesn't feel like that because we've had the others up to this point. We've had Hordak, Shadow Weaver, Catra, even side villains like the shape-changing Double Trouble, who is messy in their own unpredictable, completely untrustworthy way. The villains in this show are disasters, and it should make them less threatening, but it doesn't, because whenever they crack, they are not only more interesting, they are often more dangerous. And then when we get the one villain who doesn't crack, well, that does make for a very satisfying conclusion. And that's not a spoiler. They tell you in the theme.
You're gonna win in the end!
And it's glorious when they do. I just wanted to gush once more about this show, so I picked a specific aspect, and there you go. I love so much about this show. It's hard for me to even name all the things that I love. But the villains were a really fun thing to focus on for this time, talking about it. What are your thoughts on She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, of the villains in specific? Whatever those thoughts might be, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, subscribe, they all help. Don't worry too much about it, though. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I am just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Subin Lutfulla, Auntie Kate 808, Mira G, Angry Casperol, Dave Hall, Oliver B, Mystic Shadow, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Melissa Pedersen, Becky Sparks, Ulrich, Twylord, Tracy Scrabbit, Palba Rabajoggle, Sir Didymus is my favorite, and thanking some random folks from the lower tiers of my Patreon: Puck, Lady Sammy, and Eva Bright. Don't worry, the rats are fine. Just thought we'd kick the year off with Archie. What you think, bud? He's skeptical.